Imagine a tiny enchanted world nestled within your backyard or on your balcony or patio. A secret garden where fairies dance under the moonlight and miniature pathways lead to hidden wonders. Welcome to the magic of fairy gardens, where creativity meets nature and you become the storyteller of your own tiny enchanted realm. Whether you have a sprawling backyard or just a small sunny corner on your balcony, you can begin crafting your fairy garden today. The best part? You don't have to wait for perfect weather. Start now, indoors, and when the season changes, your miniature world will be ready to take its place in the sunshine. Hold on a minute. Before we step into this enchanted world, we must first seek the fairies' permission to capture their magic on camera. Their approval comes in the form of a sprinkling of fairy dust. Now that we have their blessings, let the journey begin. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Garden Profiler. Fairy gardens thrive in small, intimate spaces. A balcony, a patio table, or even a windowsill can become a magical sanctuary. Think of light. Fairies love dappled sunlight and soft shade, so find a spot that brings just the right touch of warmth and mystery. The foundation of your fairy garden can be anything you dream of. An old drawer filled with soil, a hollowed out tree stump, or a classic terracotta pot. What matters is good drainage and a sturdy base to hold your tiny world together. If you are using a wooden container, be sure to line it with a plastic liner to prevent moisture damage and to extend its life. But don't be afraid to get creative. Fairies love surprises. Now let's bring life to your fairy realm. Choose plants that stay small and lush. Miniature ferns, mosses, creeping thyme, or baby stairs create a whimsical forest floor. Purslane and other low-growing weeds would make an excellent addition to these gardens. If your fairy garden will stay indoors, opt for low-light loving plants like tiny ivy or dwarf ferns. The key is to create an inviting green space that feels untouched by time. Every fairy garden needs a little magic. Create winding pebble paths, tiny wooden benches, or a hidden fairy door nestled at the base of a tree stump. You can make fairy homes from bark and twigs, or craft tiny lanterns from acorns and beads. Let's quietly walk through the forest to get some inspiration from the fairies. A Japanese Zen-inspired fairy garden. In this garden, we have a miniature torii gate, a tiny bamboo plants, and a rake sand garden with smooth stones. You could also include small bonsai trees and moss to create a tranquil, meditative atmosphere. A tiny wooden bridge arches over a pebble stream, adding a peaceful, balanced aesthetic. Soft lantern lights glow, enhancing the serene ambience. What do you think? Would you want to try one of those? Then what about this lovely coastal themed fairy garden? It is set in a seashell planter, featuring tiny driftwood fairy houses, miniature sand paths, and succulent plants resembling seaweed. Small blue pebbles create a tiny ocean with delicate white seashells scattered throughout. A tiny lighthouse adds to the whimsical beachside charm, evoking a peaceful and nautical fairy retreat. What do you think? Okay, here's one for our stargazers. A celestial themed fairy garden featuring tiny glowing moon and star decorations, a miniature crystal cave, and dark blue moss, creating a dreamy night sky effect. Small twinkling fairy lights are scattered around. Silver pebbles form a galaxy-like pathway. A tiny telescope sits near a fairy house shaped like a crescent moon, adding to the enchanting stargazing atmosphere. What about a medieval castle-themed fairy garden featuring tiny stone castle towers, a miniature drawbridge over a small moat, and lush greenery? Ivy climbs the stone walls and small flowering plants add color. A winding cobblestone path leads to a fairy-sized throne under an archway, creating a magical old-world charm. A whimsical cottagecore-themed fairy garden featuring a tiny thatch roof fairy cottage, a cobblestone path lined with wildflowers, and a wooden picket fence. Miniature animals like rabbits and birds add charm, while vines climb up the tiny house. A soft glow from the fairy lanterns creates a warm and cozy atmosphere, evoking a dreamy countryside feel. Okay, here's a fairy garden with an enchanted waterfall theme, featuring a miniature cascading waterfall flowing into a tiny pond surrounded by lush greenery and moss-covered rocks. Tiny fairy houses are nestled into the landscape with glowing lanterns and delicate flowers enhancing the magical ambience. A small wooden bridge arches over the water, completing the serene and mystical scene. How relaxing. What do you think? A whimsical fairy tale village themed fairy garden featuring tiny colorful cottages, a cobblestone path, and miniature street lamps. The village is surrounded by flowering plants, moss, and tiny trees. A delicate wooden fence encloses the area with small fairy figurines placed throughout for a magical storytelling effect. Now around this corner, we have a mystical forest-themed fairy garden featuring tiny glowing mushroom houses, a winding stone pathway, and lush greenery. Miniature ferns, moss, and small trees create a dense woodland feel. A delicate wooden bridge crosses over a tiny stream surrounded by glowing fairy lights and enchanted decorations. What do you think? So how about this desert-themed fairy garden featuring tiny adobe-style fairy houses, miniature cacti, and a sandy pathway lined with colorful stones? The scene is surrounded by succulents, small desert flowers, and driftwood accents. A tiny fairy well sits in the center, creating a warm and magical desert oasis. Here we go. A tropical themed fairy garden featuring tiny palm trees, miniature tiki huts, and a sandy pathway lined with seashells. Lush tropical plants like ferns, orchids, and bromeliads surround the fairy village. A tiny wooden dock extends over a crystal clear pond, adding to the serene island paradise atmosphere. You could feel the cool breeze. What do you think? Now, here's a way to use some of your Christmas decorations. In a winter wonderland themed fairy garden featuring tiny snow covered fairy houses, a miniature frozen pond, and sparkling icicle decorations. The scene is surrounded by frosty pine trees, twinkling fairy lights, and a delicate cobblestone path dusted with snow. A tiny wooden bridge crosses over a crystal clear ice stream, creating a magical, serene winter atmosphere. It's chilly over here. What do you think? Oh, what is this I spot in the distance? It's a rustic farmhouse themed fairy garden featuring tiny wooden cottages, miniature barns, and a cobblestone path leading to a fairy-sized windmill. The scene is surrounded by small vegetable patches, wildflowers, and wooden fences. A tiny wheelbarrow and watering can add to the cozy countryside charm, creating a warm and inviting farm atmosphere. As we make our way out of those enchanted lands, let's look at one more inspiration. It's a steampunk themed fairy garden featuring tiny brass and copper fairy houses with gears and pipes, a miniature clock tower, and cobblestone pathways. The scene includes small steam vents, metallic accents, and tiny lanterns glowing warmly. Lush greenery and moss soften the industrial look, creating a whimsical and imaginative steampunk atmosphere. This is unique. What do you think? Let your imagination roam free. After all, this is your enchanted world. Now, what story will your garden tell? Will it be a cozy tea party under the leaves? A mystical forest with hidden caves? Or a tiny village where fairies gather at dusk? Each stone, each plant, and each tiny detail adds to your tale. Dream. Dream big, even in miniature. Like all magical places, a fairy garden needs care. Water sparingly, just enough to keep the plants happy, but don't drown the fairies. Trim overgrown plants to keep the scene balanced. And when your fairy garden moves outdoors, watch for wind or rain that might disturb its charm. Fairies wouldn't like that. Now, it's your turn to bring magic to life. Start your fairy garden today, indoors or out, depending on where you're watching us from. And when the warm breeze of spring arrives, your tiny world will be ready to greet it. And share your enchanted creations with us. And if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more gardening inspiration, tips, and ideas. And as always, I will see you in the next video.